Welcome to another episode of Tools, Talents, and Techniques. Today, I have a special guest. I'm really excited about diving into his journey, his experience, and all the lessons learned. And this being Tools, Talents, and Techniques, I think it's specifically appropriate to have this guest on, Mr. Mark Murphy. What he teaches, and we'll go into it on the show, is exactly what crosses all the barriers of all the different professions and industries, and that's based on like hiring and leadership. So without any further ado, here he is, Mr. Mark Murphy. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's just a pleasure. I can't wait to get the conversation going. It's great.
Well, here we go. Let's get it started. So how about just briefly, just who you are and a little bit about what you do? Nice and easy.
So essentially, I teach leaders how not to be bad. Which is, sort of a weird way to put it. But my job, my company is called LeadershipIQ, and I started it about 20 years ago. And the basic idea was I want to go out in the world and figure out what makes great leaders better than everybody else, whether it's their leadership skills, whether it's their ability to hire, whether it's their ability to motivate and inspire, whatever the thing may be. I want to bring some data to it. I want to bring some research. So when I created this, I first started it as, well, okay, we're just going to do lots of research. And then it hit me, well, okay, maybe we should, make some money off of this too. And so what we do is we take the research and then turn that into training programs. And then I go out and write books and I travel around to give talks while, the rest of my team were doing e-learning and live training and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of my passion from an early day was I want to have a job where I can do some deep dive thinking, kind of figure things out, and then I'm going to try and make my job be what I really want to do. Because it wasn't like, I could be a university professor, sure, but there weren't that many jobs that offered me the chance to do exactly what I wanted to do. And I sort of said, well, I'm probably going to have to go make this. And so that's kind of what I did.
That is a very common sentiment of when I see entrepreneurs and leaders, instead of just complaining or things that, venting about certain things, that they don't see what they want in the world. So they go and do it or go and build it. But I'd imagine you didn't start your early childhood saying, like, when I grow up, I want to be a leadership coach or a leadership professional. So tell us a little bit about your origin story. So where are you from and how'd you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Buffalo, New York. So I am a very long-suffering Bills fan. Growing up, I was, I had a lot of different interests, but I loved music. So I was, briefly considered, well, should I do classical music as a career? So former brass player. And I said, well, no, that's not going to scratch. It's not varied enough. That's not going to scratch kind of the intellectual itch. And from an early age, even though I didn't really sit down and say, I want to write leadership books for a living, I did want to have a job. I wanted to work where I could read and write. And that was a thing, even from, as weird as it sounds, it was an early age thing. I remember in second grade, I won our class's best reader award, which is, like the dumb, I've never mentioned that publicly. It's the stupidest sounding thing ever.
Breaking news on the JT Pod.
But it was, it spoke to like, this is really what I want to do. And so, as I went on through school, as an undergrad, I was actually a philosophy major. And then, married that with statistics and psychology, but it was really the philosophy part was my passion there for a while, because it was, again, just trying to figure things out. Let's just think as deeply about something as we can. And ultimately, I don't know that many high school kids who are thinking about, well, I got to figure out, leadership patterns and, what that looks like in an organization. So I didn't really know that growing up, in Buffalo, New York, at ninth grade or whatever. But, eventually did figure out like, oh, that's a whole nother set of human dynamics that, yeah, I could apply the same kind of deep thinking tools to just different contexts. And for me, it was always the same, whether I'm looking at just a random group of people, whether I opted not to try and apply this to politics, but that would have been, a similar kind of thinking about it. But this was the one I felt a certain kinship with. And I said, this is really interesting stuff. But yeah, from early age, it's not, weird as it sounds, it's not that different from, what I was passionate about even as a kid.
When you look back on the influences that you've had in your life at a young age, even whether grade school, middle school, high school, were there leaders or mentors or people in your life that helped shape your idea of what leadership is?
Yes. And, it's funny, there's always the risk of a certain confirmation bias. But one of my books, two of them, one is called 100 Percenters. And the subtitle is Challenge Your People to Give It Their All and They'll Give You Even More. And another book, the follow-up to that book, was called Hard Goals. And the underlying idea for both of those books, in one form or another, was that greatness is not always fun. It's not always easy, but it is immensely gratifying and satisfying. And there have been movements over the years where people said, well, listen, let's stop trying to push so hard, like with SMART goals, for example. I need my goals to be, specific, measurable, but achievable and realistic. And it's like, well, you think Steve Jobs was setting a lot of achievable and realistic goals? Think Jeff Bezos was doing? No, that's not how greatness comes about. And so I mention that because some of my most profound influences as a kid were a couple of teachers and a coach, a couple of music teachers, and my brass teacher and band director, and then a coach, who all adopted the same basic philosophy, which was, listen, this isn't gonna be fun every minute of the day. We're not doing this so we can eat bonbons and kind of eat pizza and chill out and just do nothing. It's like, there's going to be a bit of pain, but I'm not pushing you because I'm a jerk. I'm pushing you because I love you and I see talent in you and I care about seeing you maximize your potential. And it was, and there were days where, listen, it wasn't always pretty. I got yelled at on more than one occasion. But underlying it was this kind of love and this sense that greatness is sometimes hard, but the payoff is so worth it. And the interesting thing, and why I say, there can be a dose of confirmation bias, is that was my early influences was, okay, that's what it takes. And it ended up informing a lot of my work and research. But it wasn't just me. There's a whole body of evidence that shows that, for example, in goal setting, if you tell people, I'm going to give you a goal, but it's just do your best, versus a goal that is, I want you to achieve X and then I want you to achieve 10% beyond that, people who have the more difficult goals, the goals that might even seem impossible sometimes, they actually achieve far more than the people who have just do your best kinds of goals. And so, I see this with, whether it's with my kids or in my own life growing up or my wife, you find these people and it's like, yeah, we're going to push you. I mean, I remember I had a band director who was coming back from surgery and he'd had a cyst removed in his neck. And he yelled so hard that his stitches popped out of his neck, and if you say it now, it's like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. What kind of yelling was he doing? And it's like, well, no, trust me, it was out of love. It was, and it sometimes is hard to convince people of that, but truly it was, listen, you've got to get your head in the game. You got to push. Now, I'm not, in today's day and age, I'm not running around advocating, yell at people so hard that your neck pops open. I'm not doing that. But the underlying idea that if you push, there is something even if you don't hit the exact goal you set out to hit, pushing to do something that is a stretch, even if it's not something you're naturally great at. My wife was a runner. It still is a runner, and I am very much not. So, but I've run marathons, and it's like a sausage with feet when I'm running. It's not pretty, but I did it not because I had any natural gifts for it. I'd much rather be in a weight room than I would, lacing on running shoes. But I did it because just the very act of pushing outside of our comfort zone engenders growth. So I have a friend who is a nationally ranked, he's in the over 60 category, and he and I run together. And it's like Laurel and Hardy. I'm 200 pounds. He's a $135. And we run together. And, he's still at age 62 doing 5-minute-ish miles. I'm very much not. But, listen, we each have our own levels, right? But if I'm pushing for him to push to his max is like 5 minutes. For me, it's more like, 9 minutes. There's a difference. But if we're both pushing, we're both growing, even though the results might not be exactly the same. Pushing to grow is, it was a theme throughout my childhood and is very much still a part of what I see when I look at great CEOs, for example. The good ones, the really, really good ones, that's still a key part of what they do.
When you mentioned the leaders that you had in your life or the influences that you had, and you said, but there was love there, they were doing it, and did they either similarly or differently, did they actually verbalize that? Did they say those things like, this is why we're doing this and this is the intention behind it?
Yes and no. One example, it's this guy he didn't express it verbally, but what he did do, there was one time I had an audition that I won, hands down. It was a competition for Allstate. I just killed it. And, but there was one of the judges just for whatever reason hated me. And so this guy had some juice at the state level, my teacher, and went to bat for me and put his reputation on the line and went, made a bit of a stink, got the other judges to speak up, say, hey, why did this guy get, perfect scores and then one dinged him for something that nobody else heard, that kind of thing, and went to bat. And afterwards, he didn't say much, but he said something like, you deserve to be there. And I was like, that was it. But in those words, it was, again, not the most verbal of guys, but what he showed in his actions was, I will put myself out there for you. And that's how you know that I care. And then I, had another one who would, gruffly say, yeah, you got it. Yeah, you're getting it. This is, yep. Right. So I had a lot of guys like that in my life who were, again, not the most verbal, not the most loquacious of fellows, but they would make it known in their way. And then once in a while I'd get I'm doing this. They'd say explicit. I'm doing this because, in fact, I had a boss very early on in my career, and she would say explicitly, and she was COO of this company, but she was early in her career. She was a former gymnastics coach. And so she was like 4'11", but could still do a backflip even in her 40s. And I remember one time she laid into me and she said explicitly, I'm doing this because I think you have talent and potential and you're being a dumbass, and stop it. Okay, got it. Message received. So, she was better able to express it than some, but they made it known in their way. I think, if I were going to tweak them now, tweak their behavior based on, what I know, I'd say, one sentence isn't going to kill you. I'd say something.
One of you bring up a great point, and this is something I really want to expand on, is because when I'm thinking about your process and analyzing and researching and figuring out what works and doesn't, I really want to go into that. But before we jump into that side of it, could you just define leadership in your?
So, if you Google leadership or something like leadership versus management, generally what you're going to find is 1,000 different competing cliches, right? And so there isn't one great set definition, but the way I define leadership is fundamentally coaching and inspiring people to achieve something, whatever that's sort of to achieve blank. Now, there's a couple of caveats there. Number one is the inspiring coaching. It could be teaching, guiding, pushing, nudging. Depending on the context, you can alter the words, but essentially a leader is somebody who moves somebody from where they are to someplace that is ideally better, bigger, more important, more valuable. So when I think about, okay, a leader is somebody who inspires people to achieve blank, to achieve blank, the blank should be something that is bigger than they might have attempted on their own. It is something that is going to benefit them, benefit the organization, maybe benefit the world. That a leader is somebody who guides and inspires. Well, the guides and inspires sometimes. Guides and inspires means I give you a little kick in the tush. Sometimes it is I put an arm around you and say, I got you, buddy. It can take, depending on the person you're dealing with, sometimes it's a little bit of a more direct, pushing, challenging approach. Sometimes it's a bit more of a collaborating, comforting kind of approach. But ultimately, a leader is somebody who is going to take people from here to here. And one of the important parts of, even with that kind of uber simplified definition, is that a leader, you really can't be a leader without followers. Meaning, it doesn't mean you have to have a title. It doesn't mean you have to be a formal boss. I can guide people. If I'm in a group of friends and if I inspire my neighbors to do something, I'm not the boss of them. They're my neighbors. But if I'm inspiring them to go from where they're at to something better, okay, I'm a leader. But I'm not a leader if they all tune me out and say, you're an idiot, we don't like you. And so being able to connect with your followers in such a way that they are willing to go along with you. A leader is not somebody who's going to do it by coercion, by threats. Yes, you can have an executive role and threaten people into compliance. You can be a business owner and threaten somebody with their job if they don't make a change. That's not leadership. That's coercive power. That's titular authority. So yeah, you're in a, management or executive job, sure, but you're not really leading. The leadership part of this is I'm getting you to want to do this thing, or at least to go along with me to do this thing. And even if you're annoyed with me in these 5 minutes because I'm pushing you a little harder than you might have pushed yourself. I mentioned running with my buddy, the really fast guy, Paul. There are times where we'll be running, and at the end, it'll be like, all right, let's just kick it up this last half a mile. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I hate you so much right now. But it is, and I don't, I love him, but I'm so annoyed. I am so fatigued. But I'll do it because, I admire him. I'm going to push, and he's a quiet guy. He's an English professor. And, he's a quiet, gentle soul, just happens to be insanely fast, but he's inspiring. He's leading in that way because he is, whatever he's doing, he's inspiring, challenging me subtly or just cajoling and saying, let's kick it up half a mile, just this last half a mile. It's all part of, he is being a leader. And I am, in that case, I am following that leader.
So that's an interesting point. And based on what you're saying, I haven't fully thought through this, but I have a feeling, do intentions matter with leadership? Can somebody be a leader just because they're doing something for, it couldn't even be a positive reason. It could be a nefarious reason, but they're just doing something, but it inspires other people to do something and to move. So like incidental or accidental leadership, is that a thing?
It is, yes. So think of somebody who is charismatic, and they might not, they may just be naturally charismatic. Their smile lights up a room. They're tall, they're good looking, all the kind of classic things that can make somebody naturally charismatic. They can have an influence that they might not even recognize that they're having on other people around them. So you can have leaders that are unconsciously competent, is, a technical way that it's sometimes described. That is, they don't know why they're good at it. They just know that they're good at it. And you've seen this before with, somebody who, like, they pick up a sport for the first time. It's like, how did you do that? And it's like, I've been doing this forever. Like, how did you just go and do this thing? Well, they are unconsciously competent. They're just good. And there are leaders that are unconsciously competent. And there are leaders that are unconsciously incompetent. They're trying to be leaders, but they haven't thought that hard about it, and they can't figure out why it's not working. In an ideal world, where we land is somewhere around consciously competent. Like, I'm thinking about it, I'm intentional about it, but I'm also good at it, or I'm developing those skills to be good at it. Now, can you do it on kind of what would be like a negative leadership or a more nefarious, sinister sort of leadership? Yes, sort of. And the caveat is, you can inspire people to do bad things. So if we go back to kind of my definition of a leader is somebody who inspires, guides, whatever, people to achieve X. The intentions come in with the X, the blank. What is it we're getting people to do? So I can inspire people to do bad things. Cult leaders would be a classic example. Charismatic, inspirational. They are guiding people. I mean, with just masterfully. They're amazing at it. But are they true leaders? Well, the stuff they're getting people to do is pretty darn bad. So I'm inspiring people to achieve this blank, but the blank thing is terrible. So that's where we kind of give ourselves the caveat to say, I don't want to call that a leader. They're charismatic, they're inspirational, but in the truest sense of being a leader, they are not doing something that is bettering the person or the organization or the world. They're not making a positive contribution. And so that's where I would say they're doing things that look a lot like leadership, but it's that fundamental question that they're answering in a really terrible way.
That's a very key distinction. One of the things that you mentioned before about all the things is, a difference in a leader and a manager. Somebody once told me, and it stuck with me, and I believe he got this from his time in the military, but he said, you lead people, you manage things. And, that's one of those simple cliches, but that always stuck with me. But where I've seen this come up in my lived experience, it's not uncommon to see people in sales roles do really well and then get a management position. But the things that make them a good salesperson do not necessarily, and oftentimes they don't translate into being a leader of people.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about that in your research and your experience, what you found in those regards?
It is one of the, so a couple of things. It's a huge problem, not just in sales, but pretty much everywhere. So the most common way that organizations tend to promote leaders, people into leadership roles, is they take the best salesperson, the best nurse, the best engineer, the best programmer, the best accountant, the best whatever. And then they say, you're awesome at that job. So now you go be the leader of all the other people. Okay, there's a plethora of problems with this. Number one is that the skills required to be a great individual contributor are generally radically different from the skills required to be a great leader. So if I want to be a great a salesperson, let's just take the salesperson example. Okay, I might have to be aggressive. I might have to be able to discern when somebody's giving me the runaround. I might have to be able to push for the close. I might have to be able to lock in and tune out the rest of the world for like hours at a time. Okay, fine. Let's say those are some key salesperson skills. Now, what does it take to be a leader of salespeople? Kind of the opposite. I got to be attuned to everybody else around me. I got to be empathic. I got to let them talk a little longer than I might want to, not cut them off mid-sentence, not push for a rapid conclusion, but let them open up. I might have to do a number of things that are diametrically opposed to being a great salesperson. And the real kicker is that if you take your best salesperson, put them into a leadership role, two bad things happen. One, they might not like the leadership role. And that's one of the problems with leadership roles. If you ask people, you want to be the leader? And if they don't think about it, yeah, of course. Because what they're thinking is, I want more money. I want a bigger office. I want the title. Yeah, cool. Without thinking about any of the repercussions. The second thing that happens is, so you take the salesperson, promote him into a sales leader role, and now you have a miserable sales manager who's not that great at it. And on top of it, you just lost your best salesperson. And one of the things I always encourage my clients, executives, to do is when you're thinking about promoting somebody and you're having a real conversation with them, there's a couple things. One is try it out by having them take on pieces of the leadership role little bits at a time. So I sometimes call it the Leader for a Day program. So if I'm a leader of 15 people and I got 5-star salesperson, I'm like, all right, any of those 5 might be on my short list to promote into a leadership role. Maybe I give each of them a day of the week. Bob goes on Monday, Jane goes on Tuesday, Sally goes on Wednesday, Frank goes on Thursday, and Pat goes on Friday. Okay, now for each of those, their day, they're going to shadow me and they're going to do some of these leadership kinds of activities. Maybe it's a coaching conversation. Maybe it's solving a conflict that arose on the team. Maybe it's working on a proposal, whatever it is. They're going to shadow me a little bit and get kind of a taste for the leadership job. This does two things. One, sometimes if you do it right, it can actually give you, the boss, kind of an extra set of hands, so it can help make your day go a little easier. But two, it gives that high performer that you were thinking about maybe promoting a taste of what it's really like to be a manager, to be in that leadership role, so that then you can start to have conversations with them a couple weeks in and go, what'd you think? How's this working for you? What parts do you like? What parts do you not like? And sometimes that is such an eye-opener that they go, this sucks. I do not want, this is horrible. I don't want this job. This is like, I just want to go back to selling. Great. because now you learned something about the role and I learned something about your desire for this role. Now, even if assuming you get through all of that, then another key question I encourage everybody to ask that person is, why do you want this leadership role? What about the leadership role really appeals to you? You will sometimes hear things like, and I've heard these exact words, why do you want this leadership role? Well, I really like the idea of having some more autonomy. And I really like the idea of, being able to control my schedule a bit. If you think that's what you're getting in this leadership role, I got news for you. You are getting the opposite of that. You are getting the antithesis of autonomy and being able to plan your schedule. You are going to be at everybody's beck and call. I like the idea of having a little more time to myself and being able to, block out and do deep concentration. Oh, my goodness, this is not going to work for you, because that's the opposite of what you're going to get. And that's, a key part of any kind of goal, not just I want to be in a leadership role and I want to get promoted. But one of the most important questions is, why do you want this thing? Why is this important to you? And it will reveal two major things. It will reveal the person's inner motivation for it, so you can see if that's a fit for this goal or not. But it will also tell you, is this really their goal, or is it being put on them by somebody else? Take weight loss, for example. Okay, I want to lose 20 pounds. Great. Why do you want to lose 20 pounds? Well, doctor says I got to lose 20 pounds. Okay. Take that answer versus, why do you want to lose 20 pounds? Because I'm not able to keep up when I'm playing with my kids. And I have this dream of being able to walk my kids down the aisle someday. I want to be alive for them. They're the most important thing in the world to me. Which of those two people is going to actually lose the 20 pounds? I mean, you can tell with the first answer, there is no chance Doc says I got to do it. There's almost no chance that they're going to actually hit the target. But the second chance, no, I bet that they got a real solid shot, as good a shot as you could have. But all of it comes down to the, why do I care about this goal?
Well, in this instance that you're proposing, I would also assume it depends on what the doctor said on why they need to lose the 20 pounds. Like, yeah, because you're about to die in like 2 months. But
it's funny because a cardiologist friend of mine said very morbidly, he said, the sad reality is, he said, people generally don't change their eating habits until after the first heart attack. That's when they start to make the change. And, there is a fair bit of evidence to back that up, that there are certain behaviors that sometimes it takes if the doctor says, yeah, doc says I got to lose 20 pounds so I don't have a second heart attack. Okay, now I'm putting that on a par with the other person who said the thing about the kids. But if it's just, I had my annual physical, go through this every year. Well, okay, then, I mean, to your point, how intense is that actual desire?
Sure. So I want to go back to the beginning of your journey, because I'd love to hear about, how this evolved into your career. What was your first job out of college?
So my first job out of college actually started in college. And so I was working so let me back up for 1 sec. So I was moving along at a pretty brisk clip. And even though I still had some credits to finish up, I was working at a consulting firm and was doing essentially research and data analysis. So this is, long before we had AI. This is back in the early 90s. So, we're working in programs like DBase and Fox Pro, and, there's not that many DBase and Fox Pro programmers, I think, still around. But so we're doing data analyses of hospital operations and looking at essentially the job mix, the kinds of work that people were doing, and were there ways to get it done more cost effectively and with higher patient safety. So one thing leads to another. There's some turnover at this firm, blah, blah, blah. And I essentially was a battlefield promotion. So I end up, I'm still finishing up. I'm 20, 21, somewhere around there. And I end up basically running the data department, which was, it was 5 people. So it was small. My team was small. The whole firm was maybe 50 people. So it ends up being 5 people. And this is back in the day where I had a couch in my office. And so I'd work, go hit a class, come back to the office, work some more, maybe have to go back for a class, the work, sometimes sleep in my office. That's why the couch was there. And because we'd be running reports, and this is, again, back in the day where like when we said run reports, we meant honest to goodness, like run these data analyses that were like literally 6-8 inches thick worth of paper. We had one report we called the 1200 report because it was literally 1200 pages long. Mm. And so, I'd have to sleep on the couch in my office because then I'd have to, feed the printer. And so then I'd, wake up, throw on a hat, splash some water on my face, grab a coffee, run to a class, come back, grab a shower, come back to the office. And, so it was one of that. And so there were a few years like that. But the thing about it was that work, as we're doing this operational analysis, the first big kind of professional research award I ever won was the result of that work that I was doing. So we got the idea, let's look at what happens when a hospital cuts costs by laying off nurses, which was all the rage in the 90s. That was the era of re-engineering. So re-engineering started in business industries in the late 80s, and then it kind of caught fire in the hospital and the healthcare sector in the early mid 90s. And so hospitals would go and say, our labor costs are too high. And so we got to lay people off. And well, who's the biggest single job role in a hospital? It's nurses. And the highest priced as well. So they would lay off nurses. Well, what I discovered was that if a hospital just does an across the board layoff of their nurses, their risk of having a statistically significant increase in mortality and morbidity rates goes up like threefold. So basically, the basic rule was if you're going to a hospital where they are laying off nurses en masse, there is a very good chance more patients are going to die. That ended up being a huge deal. And the study I did actually got entered into the congressional record. There were a bunch of lawsuits at that time, too, for defrauding patients. Like, we're actually damaging patient care. And so that was I was at this company, and we ultimately sold. And by that point, I was a partner in the firm. And I'm in my mid-20s, and we sold to a $20 billion healthcare conglomerate. But it was all kind of the outgrowth of that work, and under the heading of, sometimes it's not pretty and you get pushed and it's a little hard. It was great for that, learning how to, push in a way that, some wouldn't consider naturally, necessarily healthy, but it was, it was an interesting, exciting time. And it's the kind of stuff you can pull off when you're in your 20s, much less so in your 50s. But
was because you always had this in the back of your mind of writing and doing that. And I'm sure there was a decent amount of that in that role, I'm assuming. But was leadership something that, and actually, like, what is this? Is that on your mind at this time as well?
Very much so, because I could start to see that we're dealing with all these hospitals cutting costs and, what's it doing to their patient mortality and how many patients are dying as a result of these cost cuts and all this. And this is kind of where the idea first really blossomed for me personally, that this is what I wanted to spend my time doing, was the big mitigating factor. The thing that would keep a hospital from completely falling apart when they were cutting costs was the quality of the leaders. The extent to which a leader, a CEO of that hospital, the chief nursing officer of that hospital, could convince and inspire their staff to get on board and help them make smarter cuts. If it was an adversarial, us versus them management, you're the employees, we just got to lay you off, and that was it, it was going to be bad. But if this was a leader that actually could get people on board, their engagement was high, people cared about the mission of the organization, and they were willing to make sacrifices to ensure that the hospital was able to keep going. It was all leadership. It was all the soft stuff. And that was the irony of this, was that lots of organizations go into turnarounds, but the dirty little secret is very few organizations actually come out of a turnaround. And usually the biggest factor, determining factor, whether an organization is going to come out is all the soft, fuzzy stuff. I mean, you can scrub a balance sheet till you're blue in the face, but ultimately, if your employees aren't bought in, if they're going to fight you every step of the way, if your leaders are doing a garbage job of communicating and inspiring people to take that extra step and get on board and give a little of themselves, it's not going to work. Because now when you're in, financially tough times, your margin for error is considerably smaller. Like, listen, if the organization is making money hand over fist, all right, yeah, you can make a bunch of dumb mistakes. And if you have a couple of high performers who quit, okay, you'll probably be fine. You'll survive. You'll figure it out. Why? Well, partly because you could go to the market, overpay for a replacement, and you'll be okay. You can have people kind of moving a little bit slower. When people aren't bought in, when they're resisting the leadership, they don't jump on things instantly. They kind of slow walk it, right? I'm just going to, I'll take an extra day or two before I respond to that thing. When you're making money hand over fist, okay, you will survive that. But when you're in a financially tough time where you need everybody kind of firing on all cylinders, where you need that extra gear, everybody to find that extra gear, where a day delay can really, truly make a difference, that's where the leadership stuff really gets exposed.
Well, and also it's how leadership becomes forged. I think that's you're reaching a great point, and it's something that I have thought about often. Is that you find out when times get hard who steps up and who does what they have to do, and that's when they're made. Whether it's a tragedy or it doesn't even have to be tragic. Sometimes when times are hard. So yeah, that's a great point. With in your experience, on your research, well, I guess that's part of your experience as well. Are there generally certain industries that you tend to see more leaders come out of, or more people that tend to gravitate towards some industries, or is it pretty standard across the top line?
It, for weird reasons, it tends to average out to be pretty standard. So every industry is different. So let's take the tech industry. So tech startups are not universally known for great management skills. They're known for, let's move fast, break things, let's invent, let's be creative. Product leadership, oh, sure, all day long. People leadership, not so much. But then you scale that company up, and what do you get? Well, you get, your Googles and your Microsofts and your Apples. You get companies that now realize, oh yeah, this leadership stuff is actually really important. And they start investing heavily, like more than a lot of other organizations do. And so they invest at a level that makes you go, oh yeah, no, they're getting it really, really well. And so you'll see this kind of gap. And you talk about tech startups, but it's often that way in lots of startups. It's just that if you have a startup and you are a startup restaurant, what's the product? Well, the product is the food, sort of, but the product is also the experience. Okay, well, what drives the experience? The people. So you kind of have to approach leadership a little differently if you're a service startup than if, for example, you are a tech or a fintech or something where the product is kind of divorced from the people of it. Now, do you need to have skills? Let's say you have an absolutely brilliant but complete prima donna narcissist developer. Okay, well, yeah, you're going to develop some skills in managing narcissists and dealing with really difficult personalities, which is an important set of skills, by the way. I'm not denigrating that. That's a real thing.
Yeah.
You're going to develop those kinds of skills, whereas somebody who's, managing a healthcare startup where you're much more focused on, it's patient experience. Yes, there's a clinical side, but also it's a patient experience side. You're going to have a different approach to leadership. So, long answer, but in essence, it kind of averages out because you develop different kinds of skills, and then you'll see industries, as organizations in industries get bigger, mature, there are the ones that do a really good job. There's always going to be, within every industry, there are organizations that do a wonderful job of leadership, and there are organizations that are just miserable places to be and to work. And,
Are there key indicators that you've seen, or maybe you advise executives to look for in leaders? Are there any tests? Are there any qualities that you could advise them to look for X, Y, and Z?
There are a couple of characteristics that do tend to emerge. So it will vary from organization to organization. Some organizations are very collaborative, some are very individualistic, some are very social, some are very structured, some are very creative and free-form and entrepreneurial, some are very hierarchical. So the nuance of what kind of leader you need in your particular company will change from place to place and company to company. But a couple of universals are, number one, being somewhat optimistic. Defeatist leaders tend not to be super resilient. They tend not to be super inspiring. So the ability to, and so I say somewhat optimistic because I'm going to lump in here kind of a combination of resilience, self-efficacy, and perseverance. So there are a couple of key characteristics. So if I'm optimistic, if I believe that things are going to work out, one of the fun little quirks of optimism from a psychological point of view is that optimists don't just believe. True optimism is not just, I believe things are going to work out and then I sit back and wait for them to work out. It actually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because what we've found, and what many people have found, is that optimists actually work to make the positive, optimistic thing happen. Now, somewhere along that journey, though, you are going to get bopped in the head, at which point resilience comes into play. How quickly can you bounce back from that? And so if you're somebody that something goes wrong and your first reaction is to either crack or blame everybody else around you, that is just an atrocious leadership characteristic. And so optimism is a key to keeping people moving forward. Resilience is a key to not turning into a blame and drama factory. So, right there would be a couple of characteristics. Also, the ability to, and this is true of most organizations, one interview question I will always encourage our clients to ask, I think this one might be in the Hiring for Attitude book too, is, could you tell me about a time one of your employees was really struggling? And one of the reasons for asking that question is one of the keys to being an effective leader is, how do you deal when somebody is having a hard time? Now, it's a ridiculously simple question. Right? Could you tell me about a time when somebody on your team was struggling? If the person says something like, yeah, we had a couple people that they just weren't getting it, and they just weren't up to snuff, and so we let them go. Okay. Now, if you are truly in a brutal up or out, you get one chance or you're fired kind of environment, sure, then you can justify that as a viable leadership approach. I would suggest it's not the best long-term strategy, but you could maybe justify it in the context of your organization. But that is not how most people are. That is not how most organizations. That's just not going to attract great people for any length of time. And so, if you have somebody that cannot coach people, or if their first reaction when they see somebody struggling is to blame them or think of them as an idiot, one of the interesting things is that great coaches, great leaders, they believe they have, what's often known as a growth mindset. They believe that people can actually grow and get better. If your mindset is, listen, people are what they are, and if you're not good now, there's nothing I can do to help you. Listen, I'm not saying you're going to take every player on the team and turn them into Michael Jordan. That's not realistic. But if you believe that people in general have no capacity for growth or improvement, well then, what are we doing here in a leadership role? I mean, fine, if that's your attitude, okay, but don't be a leader. That's, do something, just go back into the individual contributor role. That's totally fine. You can have that attitude and be successful in life and in your job. But my goodness, if the leader's fundamental thing is to guide and inspire people to go from here to someplace better and bigger, that is directly counter to that idea of what makes a great leader. So, those would be some characteristics that are pretty universal.
Great answer. That resonates deeply with me and my lived experience. Do you have any people that you look at, whether they're real or fictional? Like, because sometimes I think of even the archetypes that you can see out there, whether they be in movies or your books or comics, whatever, like you can actually look to them. There are certain qualities that they have that you're like, oh, we can all aspire to have those qualities in our own life. But so I'll let you take this any direction that you'd like, but are there people that stand out to you of like, this is the epitome of leadership, and this is where the North Star, if you will?
So I'll give you a couple examples with one big caveat. And the caveat is that oftentimes a leader is going to be very context dependent, meaning that what might be the right leadership approach. Now, the ideal leader is one who is going to adapt and change their style and adapt to the new context. Regardless of that context, they're going to adapt and grow and change. That is hard. It takes a lot of work, and it's not all that common. Classic example would be Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was the right leader for Britain in World War II. Unquestionably, he was directive, he was ferocious, but in an optimistic way. Resilient. He's the very definition of resilience. By the time 1950 is rolling around, it is a different world. It is a different UK. It is a different Britain. And he is not the right leader. In fact, he loses the election. And that's the sort of the classic case of right leader at the right time, but then when the time changed, he did not change. Now, here's the thing. If you're a leader who has enough self-awareness to realize this is the kind of situation where I really, truly shine, oh, then Have at it, man. That's great. As long as you have that awareness. Another example would be, let's take David Glass. So Sam Walton, founder of Walmart, retires and then ultimately passes away. The CEO who replaced him was a guy named David Glass. Now, David Glass, I forget the exact number, is some absurd 2,000% increase in the stock price. He's just a legendary CEO, but he's following the legendary CEO at the time. This is, before Steve Jobs was Steve Jobs, Sam Walton was the thing. And David Glass, so Sam Walton, charismatic, the people loved him. David Glass was the exact opposite. Quiet, unassuming. Often his hair was kind of messed up, didn't care that much, very polite, but, to some people he seemed almost shy. But his whole mantra was, I don't need to take the credit. I'm happy watching other people be successful. So he had the exact opposite leadership style of Sam Walton. But when you're following a legend like that, that's actually the exact right approach. So David Glass was the exact right leader to take Walmart and boom, put it on the map. Now, would he have been the right leader to follow in the, to do the Winston Churchill thing? Oh my goodness, no. He would have been the exact wrong kind of leader, just as Winston Churchill would have been the exact wrong kind of leader to follow as Sam Walton. And so my point is that there's a lot of these cases where you can see a leader do a brilliant job when the context is like this. Where leaders sometimes go horribly wrong is lacking the awareness to realize that the situation has changed and that maybe I, as a leader, I have particular strengths and weaknesses. My job is to find a leadership position where my strengths really get to shine, but that don't expose all of my weaknesses. One of the tricks for leadership, and this goes to another interview question I often recommend asking a leader, could you tell me about a time when your leadership approach wasn't working? To see to what extent they have an awareness that maybe I got to shift gears a little bit. Like maybe what I was doing 2 years ago isn't resonating as much right now. Maybe I need to alter my approach. But where you see kind of, great leaders then run into a buzzsaw is often because the situation has changed and they lack the awareness to realize that their leadership approach was brilliant in one context, but the context has shifted so dramatically that that approach just doesn't work.
We haven't even touched on, I think I've been so engrossed in the topics that we're talking about. We haven't even really touched on your books, and as a bestseller, I'm sorry, like we haven't talked about it yet, but if you have more time, do you have more time? Can we go on?
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
Great. Because I want to talk about your books and how you came up with what you were going to discuss in each book, and what you were trying to convey. Did it come out of your coaching and your teaching, or was it something that was already built in the framework and how you see the world?
I try with each book. It doesn't always work out exactly this cleanly, but I try to start with kind of one insight that was a little bit different than maybe what everybody else was expecting, or than even what I was expecting. So the classic example for me would be in my book, Hiring for Attitude.
And that's what I wanted to start with, because I see this as very important. So I'd love to hear about your journey through that.
Yeah. So we did this study, my team and I, and we tracked 5,200 hiring managers, and they collectively hired about 20,000 people. And we just, over 3 years, we just tracked them and saw, okay, how many people failed, how many were great, how many were in the middle. So 46% failed within 18 months. 19% went on to become high performers, and the rest were in the middle. So basically you hire 10 people, 5 are not going to be great hires, 3 are going to be middle performers, solid, but 2 are going to be awesome. Now, that was a study we did. Then we looked at it and said, okay, listen, if I'm being brutally honest, other people have done studies like this before. This is not earth shattering. Peter Drucker, like the late king of management gurus, he had done a study and he found that the failure rate for new hires in leadership roles was like 66%. And I'm like, all right, well, listen, I don't know that we're setting the world on fire here. So I let it sit for a few weeks and I'm like, I feel like something's missing. Then we got the idea, wait a minute, 46% of these new hires failed. Why did they fail? I have no idea. I mean, I think I have an idea. It turned out I was wrong. And so we said, well, let's go back and ask every manager who hired a failed hire why that new hire failed. Okay, we have all their info. We've been studying them for years now. So went back and asked them, and it turned out that 89% of the time when a new hire failed, it was for attitude. It wasn't for a lack of skills. It was for things like coachability and motivation and emotional intelligence and temperament, all this soft, fuzzy stuff. It wasn't for a lack of skills. I said, okay, well, that's the big insight, because I figured it was just going to be a case of, yeah, they can't do the job. It's like, well, listen, man, testing skills is easy. I'm not a Java programmer, but I can hire Java programmers because, the internet is on computers nowadays. I can just go to the Google box and go, give me a skills test for Java programmers, download it for free, give it to my applicants and go find the bugs in this 30 lines of code. It's not hard to do. I'm like, well, yeah, okay, now that I think about it, it makes total sense. Of course they're not failing for lack of skills, because that's the easy part. It's the attitude. Are they resilient? Are they optimistic? It's all that soft, fuzzy stuff that is the stuff that people don't pay nearly enough attention to in interviews. So my creative process with the books is ideally to start with something that's kind of an aha moment, and it may be just one aha that then I spend the rest of the book trying to teach, and like, okay, you get the aha, now let me spend the next 200 pages teaching you how to fix that issue or whatever it is. But that's kind of what I like to do with the book. And then, the truth is, I won't say they write themselves, because every book is still a royal pain to push over the finish line. But
I've heard horror stories. People, almost everybody that I know that's written a book is like, that's way harder than I thought it was.
Yeah, they're everyone. It's like you'd think after all these years they'd get easier. It's the one I just finished a couple of months ago. Like, it was no easier to write than any of the others. But as long as I have that initial, like, okay, here's the point of the book. If somebody asked me, what is the point of this book? If I can answer that question in a sentence, okay, now I can figure out how to build a book around that. But there have been times over the years where it's like I struggle and I'm like, I still can't answer this stupid thing in one sentence. And I'm like, I have books that I've stopped and, didn't complete because I'd get a part of the way into it. And I'm like, I've kind of lost the thread of what I'm trying to say here. And, I don't want to do it. Wait until I get a better insight.
Well, so let's talk a little bit more about that specific book, about this specific book. When you talk about hiring for attitude, and you mentioned some of the questions that you asked before, tell me about your insights on this and how people can do that. I would imagine when you're doing the interview process, number one, you got to be able to read between the lines sometimes and what people are saying and their resume and all those different things. And, but are there certain things that jump out when you see somebody's attitude? And I know we talked a little bit about this before, but I'd really like to dig into this. I just think it's such an important piece of the puzzle, as do you. So I'd love to hear you speak more on that.
So let me offer one really hyper-specific technique that opens the door to figuring out a lot of a person's attitude. And it is this. So oftentimes when we interview somebody, when a hiring manager, when an owner, a CEO, whoever is interviewing a candidate, they'll ask a question and they inadvertently give away the right answer to the question. So give you an example. Could you tell me about a time when you had to balance competing priorities and how did you do that? Could you tell me about a time you were asked to do something you didn't know how to do and how you overcame that? Could you tell me about a time you made a mistake at work and how did you bounce back from that? Anytime I add those words at the end, and how did you bounce back from that? And how did you overcome that? And how did you do it successfully? I am telling the candidate, I don't really want to hear your struggles. What I want to hear is a success story. Now, here's the kicker. If you break the world into two piles, problem bringers and problem solvers, if I ask a problem bringer about a problem, they're going to tell me about the problem and then they're going to stop talking. If I ask a problem solver about a problem, they're going to tell me about the problem, and then with no further prompting, they are automatically going to tell me how they solved the problem. So the rule is never ask somebody how they solved the problem. Ask them about the problem, and they will immediately reveal themselves to you as being either a problem bringer or a problem solver. So if I ask somebody, could you tell me about a time you were asked to do something you didn't know how to do? Somebody, I promise you, is going to say, oh, geez, yeah, it happened every day at my last job. It was terrible over there. That's why I'm interviewing with you guys. Okay, if you look at this and you go, oh, you're going to be asked every day here too. Like, they just told you they are terrible. Now, it's a great answer. I mean, they're horrible. Don't hire them. But it's a great answer because they just instantly revealed who they really are. And so one of the biggest mistakes, and it's so simple, and yet I see the most experienced CEOs and chief HR officers make this mistake constantly, is they add in these words that just give away the right answer. And everybody who implements this, even just this one stupid little technique, everybody who does it comes back and tells me, once I stopped giving away the right answers to the questions, the stuff that came out of people's mouths is bananas. And it's like, you won't experience it until you interview somebody without giving away the right answer. And it takes a little practice because it feels almost awkwardly open-ended. Could you tell me about a time you lacked skills or knowledge to complete an assignment? And stop talking. Could you tell me about a time you made a mistake at work? And stop talking. Like, I want to complete that, but you can't. You have to leave that tension sit there and let the candidate answer.
That is such a great tip. I love that little tools, talents, and techniques, right? I love those little things that you can like make a little change and make a enormous. Another question about leadership and leadership characteristics. One thing that I've noticed, or that I when I look at people, and especially people that I hold in the high regard that are in a leadership position, there's this balance that many people in those positions will have, and it's not just one balance. There's several different things, but I would say the ones that really stand out to me are like confidence and humility. You know, that somebody can be confident and be very, they seem like they got it all, but they're also very humble and, not over the top. And I think that's such a unique balance. Is that something that you see in leadership? Are there any other things that are like that people have certain characteristics that may seem like they're opposed to one another, but end up being very complementary?
Yes. So the confidence, humility one is, I'm glad you brought that one up, because that's like the king of them, right? That is the most powerful paradox of leadership, is that it's knowing that you can achieve really good things, knowing that you have the skills and the wherewithal to get things done, but also being open to new ideas and open to a better way of doing it. Another one that is in a similar vein is optimism and candor. and being optimistic, like we are going to make this work. We are going to get through it. But candor, let's not blow smoke at each other here. We are in the crap right now. We are in a bad way. And this is not good. But we're going to figure out a way out of it. But let's not kid each other. We're starting from a rough place. So let's acknowledge that. Let's be brutally honest with each other that it's a little harsh right now, but we're going to work it through. And so that's another one. Great leaders tend not to operate in denial. They tend to be willing to confront reality. And, the issue you raised with the humility ties into this, because I got to be willing to confront reality. And even though I am optimistic we're going to make it through, and I'm confident that I have skills to help us get there, I also have to have the humility that there may be better ways and better ideas to help us get through this than currently exist in my own brain. And so I got to be willing to invite others into this process.
Mm-hmm. Another one that jumps out to me, and I've thought about this sometimes. I don't think about it all the time, but when it comes up, I'm like, oh yeah, that's it. You recognize it when you see it, and trying to put those words around it. But another one or two would be patience and urgency. That they're patient and they're calm, but determined and want to move forward. So there's some really special characteristics that I see when I look at people in a leadership role or a place that I would, model some of my behaviors and activities after. There really is a balance between all these things. And when you see it, it's like, man, that's it. And then try to build towards that. Like, okay, what can I do in my life to establish similar practices or things that I can move in that manner or develop myself as a person to get there. So that's, I love this stuff.
Well, and I love your focus on that too, because going back to your earlier question about when you think about great leaders in real life or even in fiction, one of the things that we tend to focus on when we talk about leaders is we tend to focus on the extremes, right? Because that's what makes for great TV. That's what makes for great movies. That's what makes for great biographies, is we don't often talk as much about the nuance that it was, they went into the meeting and it was, boom, rah, rah, and they had to, bring the board to the feet to the fire and all that. But where's the wrestling with this? The sitting in the office and going, oh, geez, Louise, I better, before I go give the fire and brimstone speech, I got to pause for a second here, and maybe I got to reach out to my one ally on the board and go, listen, I need your help here. The humility to go along with the fire and brimstone, we don't often get the nuance, but that's where the real magic happens.
Yeah, no, I agree. So listen, you've been really generous with your time. So in our last couple minutes here, I want to share all of your books, your socials. I'm going to share all that in the show notes, but is there anything that you want to leave our listeners and the people viewing with before we take off?
The one thing I would say is there's kind of a message of hope, which is that generally speaking, people who listen to shows like this, who are going to commit to thinking about, I'm looking for some tools, I'm looking for some techniques. That kind of mindset already puts somebody in the top, 10+% of people, because it's the willingness to even go and seek out answers and go, is there somebody with a different idea? Maybe I got to go hear what Dustin has to say. Maybe I can get something out of this. The fact that somebody is willing to do that already is like, yeah, I'm in another step. And that's a huge thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? So on that note, part of the reason why I even have one, I enjoy doing it, having this podcast. I want to learn from people that I say, wow, that's interesting. Like, how'd you get to this place? Like, what was your journey? What are the lessons that you've learned along the way? But also, I have a lot of different friends and people, colleagues in different industries, and people from finance, real estate, sports. I mean, you name it. I just have, and for a long time in my life, I felt like the Venn diagram of my life didn't really overlap. Like the people I played basketball with aren't the same people I played rugby with. I go to concerts with these people over here, and they don't work in the same industry. But I'm meeting all these fantastic people that have a lot to offer the world, and it's like this is my opportunity to have long form conversations and expose different friends from different areas and people now all over the world to these different industries and these different mindsets, and help people learn and grow. So yeah, this has been such a pleasure to do this show, and present company included, to have you come on and share your wisdom and your experience. Mark, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was just a blast.
Yeah. All right, Mark, till next time.
Take care.